Oh, crikey, it's another sickeningly positive perusal of an episode of Doctor Who. It's happy times and places in which I, Toby Hadoke, watch an episode, try to guess what my special guest's favourite things about it are, and generally make observations and throw in a few facts.
Hello, my name is Jeremy Bentham. I'm very pleased to nominate as my Doctor Who story for Toby's enterprise, Marco Polo.
Well, hello and welcome everybody. It's time for part 4 of the Doctor Who classic, the missing 7-part historical adventure, Marco Polo. This episode, Wall of Lies, but hopefully it will be a monologue of truths after that truncated their introduction from Jeremy Bentham, my guest. If you'd like to hear the whole thing, which is worth hearing, but early on with these podcasts, I realise you don't want the whole thing to introduce every single episode, so you get the whole one on episode 1, and then just a short reminder on the subsequent ones. But Jeremy's well worth listening to, and actually, because we have the advantage, I'm going to turn the fact that I'm flying by the seat of my pants to an advantage. As I record this, episode 3 has gone out to patrons. Patrons are 6 months in advance. If you're not a patron and you're listening to this, you could have been doused in facts and speculation and non sequiturs and random unnecessary and probably slightly self-indulgent self-reflection. When you had a few more hairs on your head and a fewer wrinkles around your brow. But for the patrons, I'm recording this as episode 3 has gone out, and this is episode 4. So it's it's very much a work of desperation. But what that does mean is that we've had a little bit of feedback that I can share because we're sort of as live. So, and there's a lot of love, I'm very pleased to say, for my guest, Jeremy Bentham, who is a very self-effacing person who I don't think would acknowledge that he's one of the heroes of Doctor Who fandom, but he really is. And therefore Doctor Who as a whole, because fandom in those early days, I think, was very important to establish some of the stuff that we know now and to teach us how to research, who to research, to speak to people that, are now no longer available to us. All sorts. Now that any old divvy with an iPhone, raise his hand, can get access to people. Very, very different in those days. Very, very different. People were nothing like as accessible, nor as, I think, interested in talking in the same way that they are now. So I'm glad there's a lot of love for Jeremy. Frank Shale says, the Doctor and his many friends and allies may be seen as the hero of the show as it appears in fiction, but Jeremy Bentham is paramount as my hero of Doctor Who in real life. Without his efforts in the 1970s, I would never have found the portal to a deeper understanding of the series and everything it led to. My life would have been immeasurably poorer, and I would not have found the friends I have or the ability to appreciate every creative enterprise in a less superficial way than I know what I like. I appreciate the work of talented people we don't see on screen because of JJB, the original explorer, the Marco Polo of my Doctor Who fandom. I think that's brilliantly put and therefore worth sharing in its entirety. Thank you, Frank. And Siobhan Galichard adds, he's still wrong about the gunfighters, though. Ha ha ha. Well, I've just been writing a podcast about Doctor Who, a celebration, and the Haining books that Jeremy Bentham wrote, the story assessments of, in which it was established that the gunfighters is the worst ever Doctor Who story, TM. So listen out for that. It will actually have come out before this for non-patrons, but for patrons, who knows? Depends where I am. I don't know what's happening at the moment. And Peter Crocker tells us that, because in the Singing Sands, I said there was a rumour in the 80s that it existed. Peter Crocker says, the rumour about the Singing Sands originates from Telecon in 1987. While introducing the surprise screening of The Faceless Ones 3, at the time officially missing, Mick Smallman mischievously said, unfortunately we can't show the Singing Sands for copyright reasons, but we do have this instead. So, therefore, a Doctor Who fan done a joke, and its humorous nature completely bypassed the neural receptors of some of the Doctor Who fans in the audience. Who'd have thought that? And they took it on face value and repeated it as a fact, and it stuck. Oh, there's so many things going on there that are typical of Doctor Who fans that it could almost be the entire experience bottled. That's my David Warner tribute. I'm recording this in the week of the death of David Warner, sadly. Wonderful man, wonderful actor. Michael Herbert tells us Xenia Merton appeared in Space 99, of course, as Sandra. Yes, indeed, sadly no longer with us. Yes, I wrote her obit for The Guardian. And David Gillespie gave me half a point for episode 3 because my choice and Jeremy Bentham sort of crossed over. Thank you, David. I still don't think I stand a chance. I think Jeremy is a lot more scrupulous and scholastic and methodical than I in the choices he's chosen. The lighting and the director and something else. Doesn't matter. It's I think that probably the. I don't know. Do you like the bits where we choose? Oh, it's just something to hang a conversation on, isn't it? Nothing to get too bogged down in. I doubt anyone's keeping score. If you are, well, I'm not going to hobby shame anybody. So let's get to episode 4 of Marco Polo, Wall of Lies. In 3, I'm watching the Loose Cannon Recon in 3, 2, 1, and of course it has to load. Here we go. Well, I mean, a word about the recons as well. The fact that we can experience this in anything like watchable form is delightful. Excuse me while I'm actually having carrot juice, so I expect to regenerate in an ignominious fashion very shortly. I'll fall off my exercise bike. So they're looking for Barbara in telesnap form. You can tell when it's a telesnap because they've got the sort of lines going down the screen. But there's so many photos and things here. I love that image. That's a really Doctor Who-y thing, isn't it? That cliffhanger of the eyes moving in the wall. It's very much the thing of sort of, Sinbad and perilous adventures and the sort of thing that was drama of the time that adventure, swashbuckling kind of adventure sort of stuff with caves and moving eyes and. Yes, Jimmy Gardner there with a skull cap. I didn't even know we'd got many photos of him, but yeah, I can tell it's him now. But he's best known as a sort of Sidney Bromley kind of figure, bald head. He wouldn't have needed a bald cap for most of his career. Bald head, hair out the sides, and big bushy beard. He is one of those that, who'd then play clowns for the Royal Shakespeare Company. It's a particular look. He's the sort of guy who looks like he could have been a peasant in a Terry Gilliam film had Sidney Bromley not been available. Sidney Bromley never in a Doctor Who. Oddly, because he was one of those ubiquitous sort of character players. You know him from lots of Dragon Slayer and Terry Gilliam films and has never been in Doctor Who, so why am I talking about him? He's in a couple of the Quatermasses as well. One of them without his big whiskery beard. But anyway, Sidney Bromley, wild-eyed. Like I say, he looked like Catweasel, basically. He wouldn't have needed makeup to play Catweasel. But never did a Doctor Who. And I got asked by the patrons on my AMA. Liam sent a question saying, which actors should have been in Doctor Who. And of course, my mind went completely blank, thinking of all sorts of actors that were working in British television over 26 years who didn't do a Who. I love that question, love that idea. And obviously you don't go, Jack Lemmon, trying to pick somebody that was working on British television. And I remember on a Gallifrey base forum somebody saying, who's the list of actors you think should appear in Doctor Who? And somebody went, Michael Shanks, Richard Dean Anderson. You go, okay, you like Stargate, but let's try and get it to people who are likely to be in the sphere of Doctor Who. And I know Ben Browder and Ryan Carnes and a couple of American-based actors have ended up doing TV Doctor Who, but I have more fun with the exercise when you try and so, as I say, I like the idea of thinking about actors that never appeared in TV Doctor Who during the classic era that could have done, that were in the vicinity. Like, why did Charles Kay or Anthony Valentine never turn up? And interesting, why did Darren Nesbitt never appear in the show again after Marco Polo. The chances are he was around. I suppose he was very much a 60s kind of figure. He had, I mean, it's on public record. He was, I think he did go to court for spanking his girlfriend. I think there was something went on there, and I think that probably made his career take a backward step. And he'd poured all his money into a film called The Amorous Milkman that, at a time when sort of odd jobs or manual work or jobs particularly associated, you're like a handyman, or there's the Confessions films, aren't there, where he's a window cleaner and a milkman, and it's like the sort of jobs done by men who call at your house. But what if they were men who you bored wives to kiss? There's a whole genre of British films like that, and I fear Derren Nesbitt was perhaps slightly late to the party with his Amorous Milkman. And that perhaps his thought that a British... I've never seen it. A British sex comedy was just what we needed. Was perhaps not as on the zeitgeist as he might have thought. Which is a shame, because I think he's a really interesting actor. I love his soft, purred intonation here, and he looks magnificent. I mean, that costume they've got him in. They must have been very hot under the studio lights in that stuff. But they're leather and they're studded and they're fur-lined and then you've got all these tapestries at the back. I mean, it looks great. I mean, I wonder how much we would have lost that it was in black and white, and actually, the real magnificence was in the studio. But I'll still, I'm happy for it to come back so I can discover how disappointed. Ow! I've just dropped my cup of tea, but miraculously, the cup has survived, and I've got a tiled floor, so I can keep. Don't sink yet. I can keep transmitting, because I don't like having to stop it, because then it might knock your viewing out of sync. If you are viewing, a lot of people don't even watch the episode, so I don't know what you're getting out of this, because I've barely spoken about it. So, yes, sadly, a cup of tea that was just at exactly the right temperature. I don't have the most robust of mouths, so when it's too hot, I have to let it cool down a bit, and then it gets too cold very quickly. So I have to. It's like a shower. I have to. There's an ideal point when I drink my tea. But if I was to do that now, I'd have to lick it off the floor. This TARDIS crew is fantastic, isn't it? Because I often think, I mean, I do think the Davison TARDIS is a little overcrowded, but it works really well here. I think something to do with the length of the stories and the speed of the storytelling. But Barbara's been imperiled here. Susan is befriending Ping Cho. Ian is befriending Marco. They can afford to take up the action if the Doctor vanishes, but everyone has a sort of role in the story. And I actually quite like. I know Tigana has, is if we want to be cruel about it, is a pretty obvious villain. I refer you back to Kieran Hodgson's brilliant "I'm very, very trustworthy," which makes me laugh just to think about it. But I actually quite like the way they have to conduct themselves within the drama. They're all really there on sufferance for Marco. Tigana is a peace envoy. And our heroes are, interlopers on the journey. So that means that there can be no outright hostility. There has to be sort of veiled threats and accusations, or as as Barbara's just done there, it's less veiled. She actually goes, "But hang on, I saw you," and he's going, "No, I didn't," and nobody can quite sort of. There can't be a big confrontation yet, because it all has to be sort of bridged by Marco. So you have this uneasiness where nobody quite trusts each other. And, Tigana, I think I used the line in Running Through Corridor. In fact, this is where American translation sometimes it needs a rejig. I put about Tigana that he smiles and murders while he smiles, and my American editor changed this to he will smile and kill someone while he does so, and I went, no, smiles and murders while he smiles is a quote. Shakespeare's Richard III to be says it, though it's also the kind of thing that Iago would say. But anyway, it has to be phrased that way for it to ape the Shakespearean that I am referring back to. But never mind, Richard. Actually, Tigana is more like Iago, who is called Honest Iago, and his great trick is that everybody thinks he's the most trustworthy person, and then when everyone buggers off, he turns to the audience and says, "Ha ha! I'm plotting all of this, and I'm jealous and mean, and all of that." And it's the great thing about the face that people present in order to get where they want to get, and the dark, the dark subconscious thoughts that they have, or the dark underhand acts they are putting into practice. I think Xenia Merton is absolutely beautiful, and it's it's a lovely story that she has. That you have this this cheerful young girl who's so full of life, who's on a journey to get married to somebody who's 85 or something that she's never met. That's and as I get older, I've got 17-year-old and 22-year-old, and I think about the things that I did when I was younger and think, God, I wish I'd appreciated those times more, because that flush of youth, there's nothing like life, work, everything gets in the way, but also physical ability. And I think the ability to appreciate or to how we experience things is much more acute when we're younger. And I would like to have seen more stories for Susan where she actually has a mate, because they're quite proactive in this. Ping Cho, doesn't she? She goes and nicks the TARDIS key, and so it means that Susan and her mate are kind of active within the drama, because they have their little sort of teen gang. And I think that's when they give Susan something like that to do, I think that's much more interesting. Her story in the Aztecs is quite, which is sort of similar to Ping Cho's, isn't it? In the Aztecs, she is promised to be married to somebody who's soon going to be killed for ceremonial reasons, and she's like, "Hang on, I'm not marrying somebody who's going to die." So actually, it's a similar kind of setup, but I think there's something a bit sadder about the idea that Ping Cho, as she understands it now, is going to be committing her life, or a significant part of her life. The 75-year-old husband isn't gonna die as quickly as the perfect victim, but it is still about subordinating a young woman's vitality and potential to a bloke and to a societal role. And I think that's really interesting. I think that's really, and it's done in a way that is rather human, without being censorious or politicized. It's more about the sort of human angle of it, and it's rather sweet. Oh, and Ping Cho is really sort of active sort of character. And I like the fact that Marco is kind of the referee in the whole story. The story is called Marco Polo. Well, is it? I mean, is there anybody out there that calls it A Journey to Cathay? That was another joke that was cut out of Running Through Corridors. The 60s version. Which I sort of went off on one about the titles that when the marvellous Howe Stammers and Walker released their Doctor Who the 60s, 70s and 80s and the Doctor Who handbooks, which are all marvellous things, but I've always taken a step back from the official story titles of these stories are this. And in fact, I don't think they call Marco Polo A Journey to Cathay, do they? Or do they? Because I think they should, if they call the Daleks, aka the mutants, if they call Edge of Destruction Inside a Spaceship, and if they call the Massacre Massacre of Bartholomew's Eve, and most egregiously Mission to the Unknown Dalek Cutaway. But this, because this is called A Journey to Cathay on the paperwork as much as, indeed more than it is anything else. And so I sort of mused. I said, are the Z-Cars fans, talking about that episode that's just set inside with two of the coppers talking inside one of their vehicles as a budget saving exercise. They've called it Inside the Car, and and the following week, one of them went to see his girlfriend, and it was called A Journey to Cathay. But I think that was probably slightly too arcane and a joke, in very inverted commas, too far for my American publisher, and probably fair enough. I rue some of the things that are cut from those volumes, but I also think some of them are probably fair enough. Philip Vosbag, I like the fact that Akamat doesn't really like Tigana, and I like the fact that Tigana's got an earring. And Philip Voss would have been really young here, but he's got the heavy makeup, hasn't he, and the big sort of droopy moustache and the long hair. And they're drinking out of those lovely china cups. I love all the little sort of properties, and I think it would have looked so. It seems to me to have looked so convincing. Now, that's interesting in and of itself, because to say, it will have looked wonderful and it will have looked authentic and it will have really exuded the atmosphere and spirit of the time. But is that what Doctor Who fans want? This is my battle with Marco Polo. I love the fact that I love Marco Polo because it's a languid, intelligent, character-driven story. But I was brought to Doctor Who by laser guns firing at Nymons and Mandrills, and exciting death scenes, and large villains, and sci-fi adventures. So do I enjoy this because I have the luxury to do so, because it exists as a counterpoint to what Doctor Who actually is? And this picture of Hartnell that I can see in front of me, which I hadn't realised is from Marco Polo, because I think the quote is from the Daleks' Master Plan, is in the middle of that book, Doctor Who: A Celebration, and it's Hartnell with a lamp outside the TARDIS. And it has the quote, a citizen of the universe and a gentleman to boot, which I didn't really know what it meant when it was in the middle of Doctor Who: A Celebration. But in fact, because the main picture illustrating the Hartnell era in the Radio Times 20th Anniversary Special, and they're the two big formative books if you're a Doctor Who fan of my age. Doctor Who: A Celebration, the Radio Times 20th Anniversary Special is not a book, it's just a large magazine. But they were the two things that gathered together for the first time. The list of all the companions, the list of all the stories, a description of all the stories. And for somebody that had sort of grown up with the odd snatched copy of Doctor Who magazine and the Target books, my sphere of reference in terms of Doctor Who stories was quite small. In fact, so I say from fans of my age, only for fans of my age that didn't have access to Doctor Who magazine, which I didn't. We lived in the countryside in the middle of nowhere. You'd occasionally pick one up from your newsagents on holiday. So in fact, probably most fans of my age probably had a better idea of the broader canvas of Doctor Who than I did, interestingly. I mean, the first time I'd heard of Dodo, Stephen, Katerina was in the Radio Times 25th Anniversary Special and its follow-up Doctor Who: A Celebration. Obviously, this TARDIS crew were familiar to me because of the Five Faces of Doctor Who repeat. So, and because of the Crusaders book, the Zabi book, those early books, Doctor Who in an Exciting Adventure with the Daleks, or Doctor Who and the Daleks, which was weird because it was told from Ian's point of view. Ian does have a sort of special place in Doctor Who history, doesn't he, really? I mean, Sue Perryman in The Wonderful Adventures with the Wife in Space, which if you've never read, you should, where a husband fan and a wife non-fan watch Doctor Who in order and slay some sacred cows in the process. But it's great watching it through Sue's very, game involvement as a non-fan. And, she says that the series at this point should be called Ian. And the Doctor is the sort of, the Doctor is the sort of slightly sideways character part, and Ian is the leading hero type of thing. Is there a bit of a bromance going on between it? No, there's not. They're just They are two decent men who want to see the best in each other and who want to trust each other. But there's some moments where Marco Polo really loses his temper and shouts and gets quite cross, and it's nice because it would be too, it would be too boring if he was like like a berobed Deep Space Nine alien. Do you know what I mean? The ones who are all just the ones who are very, very good and very sincere. I don't know why I chose Deep Space Nine in any sort of American sci-fi, because I like Deep Space Nine because it actually has shades of darkness and grey more than any. I think I'm thinking of Philip Anglim's character. There's just those very sincere, boring, boring sort of aliens who are good. I may be misremembering and mischaracterizing there, but what I'm saying is Marco could have been boring, but he's actually got, he's got an edge to him, and he gets cross with the travellers, which I rather like. And what I think is the brilliance of this is that our heroes have to be underhand in order to get what they want. And, you've got Marco here saying, I'm sorry I doubted your word to Garner. Basically, in this setup, in this dynamic here, our heroes are the ones that have been dishonest, and Tigana is the one who's now more trustworthy in Marco's eyes. But because the Doctor and Ian have been dishonest, now they've got motive. They want to get the ship back, and we know how important that is. And Marco, he accepts that, they want their property back, but he doesn't understand the bigger picture. And because he is, a savage to the Doctor, which is adds another dynamic. It's that, Marco is a decent man, and here he is getting cross, which like Marco is a decent, nice man, but to the Doctor, he's a primitive, and I love that. And the Doctor doesn't hide his contempt for that. But that kind of makes us feel a bit sorry for Marco, because we know that Marco's all right. But in order to get the ship back, which we know that they need and we need for the series to continue, they have to mislead Marco. So therefore, it's totally understandable in you poor, ignorant, stupid savage. I love William Hartnell's Doctor in this story. He's slightly different in this story from how he's been before and how he is afterwards. There's a spikiness here, and I know he can be tetchy, but there's an alien impatience with the business of being the tedious things that we need as human beings, like reason and explanation, and the Doctor hasn't got time for that, and his contempt for Marco is really interesting, because within the dynamic of this. And actually, Marco is an especially reasonable and intelligent character who has decent motives. But because they clash with the Doctor's motives, the Doctor's like, well, this is a flea biting to me in the bigger picture. This episode is, of course, I think it's this one. Directed by John Crockett. I was quite pleased to find a picture of John Crockett when I was going through some newspaper files. It was a picture of three men, and it said one of them was John Crockett. So, of course, I clipped the one and said, this is John Crockett. And then Richard Bignell comes forward and goes, I've got some pictures of John Crockett from his daughter. I was like, God, I didn't even know he had a daughter. Yes, careful where you put your hush puppies, Who detective, because Mr. Bignell, you'll probably find that you're walking in the footsteps of Richard Bignell. And he sent this picture of John Crockett to me, and it's like, oh no, John Crockett's not that guy. He's the guy on the left of that guy, and the picture's miscaptioned, which is interesting in and of itself. But we don't know much about. I mean, in fact, we know so little about him that within the making of the Aztecs, one of the you wouldn't normally do this, I don't think, and you certainly wouldn't do it now. They say to John Ringham, one of the actors, do you know what happened to John Crockett? He goes, oh yes, he's dead. So that is a revelation within the course of the documentary, whereas you wouldn't do that now. You wouldn't have somebody reveal, in that way, I don't think, because that stuff is sort of known now. But that definitely wasn't known. It was definitely where I found out that John Crockett was dead was when John Ringham said so. And it's a shame because he was never interviewed about that. There's more reasons why it's a shame that somebody's dead. But a shame that we missed him, because I'd like to know sort of a bit more about him because he's only there for season 1, like so many season 1 directors. He's there at the beginning, and that's it. And we've been lucky enough to interview John Gorrie, for example. But Henrik Hirsch, who did The Reign of Terror, is a complete mystery. And John Crockett is sort of in the middle of that. And I don't know why he's any less of a mystery, really, than Henrik Hirsch, because we don't have any words for it. I think because Henrik Hirsch's involvement with the show is in itself surrounded by a bit of mystery. But, Hirsch went on to do Emmerdale and stuff like that. Whereas, John Crockett does this episode, and he does the Aztecs, and then he disappears. Remember Derek Ware saying to me that he thought Crockett was a bit sort of superior about television, but Derek felt that about quite a few people who worked in television. It was a bit of a bugbear of Derek's. I certainly think the way that the Aztecs is really intelligently and elegantly directed. It would be interesting to see how Wall of Lies compares to the Hussein episodes around them. I think Hussein is an elegant director, but it's difficult to judge because obviously elegance is not what's required of the Cave People episode, and that's very much sort of dark and dirty and grimy and hazardous, whereas this has far more dialogue exchanges and character stuff, which we know from other work that Hussein is good at. So it would be interesting if we could, when shown to a scene from each episode, if we could pick out the differences between Crockett and Hussein. Both excellent directors though, so I don't think there'd be any dip in quality. But it would be interesting to compare. I mean, it would just be great to have them. But that would be another, once the novelty had worn off, and we'd watch them for the first 25 times. I'll probably manage that in 3 weeks. I might then engage in that exercise. So I went off piste slightly there, and I spilt my cup of tea. See, the advantage of a tiled floor, the disadvantage is that usually when a cup hits it, it smashes. But my Where's Wally cup? I wonder if it's weakened it. Well, I'll keep you posted on that, but it's done okay. We lose cups a lot in this house, and I get quite emotionally attached to cups. Anyway, that's not what you've tuned in for. But there are certain Doctor Who cups here, which if they do meet their maker, I will be very sad about, and I will blame somebody else for, even if I'm the one that knocks it off, because I do that. Well, they shouldn't have asked me that question that made me turn round and knock the cup off that was next to me and nobody else was anywhere near. They shouldn't have initiated the series of events that led me to picking that cup out on this particular day when I was the one that knocked it off. And, anyway. My favourite thing about Wall of Lies is I think that intelligent character dynamic that John Luca Rotti sets up, whereby decency becomes a weapon, and to prove that you're worth trusting with Marco is you have to deal with him straight. But unfortunately, to get what they want, our characters can't be straight with him. They have to do underhand things. And Tigana sees that and manipulates that. So it's those character dynamics that, and then throw in the mix the Doctor's contempt for people from Earth, particularly from the olden days. And I think you've got some really interesting stuff there that is unique to this story. The way that the characters interact, and that the drama is dependent on so much of that. I hope I haven't chosen something like that before. Jeremy Bentham, however, the hero of many people's formative Doctor Who experiences. What's Jeremy going to choose? Let's click on him. And where is he? Jeremy is here. Going to press.
The Wall of Lies episode is as good a place as any to talk about the hole that's at the centre of our tale of Marco Polo. And it's the missing episodes, because, as we all know, despite the best efforts of people going back some 40 plus years, Not a single episode has been recovered from this story. Not only that, but there isn't a single telesnap in existence. And as far as I can see, there were no production photographers from the BBC on set when this episode was recorded. And this is so curious because if you have a copy of Richard Molesworth's excellent book White, he goes to great lengths to actually point out that an awful lot of prints were made of Marco Polo, probably more than most others of the Doctor Who serials recorded in the 60s. So where the heck have they all gone? We know, for example, now that, say, some copies went to the Royal Navy. They had their own archive based at Portsmouth. My own Uncle Pat, who served in the Mediterranean in the 1960s, does remember Doctor Who being one of the things that was shown as a 16mm telerecord, 16mm film of all the ship he was serving aboard, although typically he couldn't tell me which Doctor Who episode or episodes were shown by the Navy. You had interest from Disney, you had so many other people interested in this story, and yet nothing has ever happened to yield one single episode's recovery. And that's a shame, and it probably does explain, well, the Navy connection probably explains a little bit why so many episodes in the early 80s did turn up in the south of England. That's probably when the time the Navy was moving out the prints of their library and replacing them with video recordings. But again, no Marco Polo, so sorry Toby, but for this episode we're basically just focusing on that which doesn't exist in the episode, the Wall of Lies.
Well, I love that. And actually, I am working on, I've half written, I mean, a lot of my Indefinable Magic podcasts are half written. I sort of write them when I'm in the mood or feel I can, wax lyrical about a subject. So I occasionally just jot down, bits and bobs and then go back to them and piece them together about missing episodes. And I do have a theory that the missing episodes are our love for Doctor Who. In a way, but I won't go into great detail there, although I love the fact that Jeremy has chosen that. And before you write in, I think he was saying there's no telesnaps for Wall of Lies. We know there are telesnaps for Marco Polo, but of course no, there are no telesnaps for Wall of Lies because it was John Crockett's episode, and we have the telesnaps because of what is Hussein. And again, there's the other beautiful thing is we find the telesnaps. Well, we didn't, I was not responsible. The telesnaps are found, but actually no telesnaps for Marco Polo are found. Telesnaps for loads of other stories are found. Not for season 3. They weren't taken. A lot of the Troughton ones, though, Marcus Hearn found them, didn't he, in the BBC Written Archive. But there were some stories for which telesnaps were taken there are telesnaps taken for stories that exist, so we don't really need them. Nobody's that bothered. Although I think it probably would be interesting one day to look at the telesnaps compared to the episodes and go, so how much do these really give an indication of what the episodes were like? Not much really, but they're better than nothing and they're interesting and fascinating. But even then, even with that, we didn't have the telesnaps from Marco Polo. For some reason, the telesnaps kept by the BBC did not include those for Marco Polo. So you go, oh, that's a shame. It's like Enemy of the World episode 4. For some reason, they were missing. Maybe John Curo was ill that week. And of course, that became a moot point when the episode comes back. And you go, oh, this is another reason why this is particularly interesting to see, because we don't actually have that episode. But then Marco Polo... the director finds the telesnaps in his attic. So, but many years later. So these, the jigsaw of Doctor episodes keeps being added to, and amazing, isn't it? That of all the episodes, of all the stories where 6 episodes of telesnaps existed in private hands, just happened to be one where the BBC, our main source of our telesnaps, didn't have any at all. But then added to that means, well, you've got a 7-parter. One episode isn't directed by that particular director, so we don't have the telesnaps for that. So then that adds to the murkiness. And, I wonder if, presumably as Richard Bignell has spoken to John Crockett's daughter, that is a stone that has been turned. Wouldn't it be interesting if it's a bit like the Terror of the Zygon stuff where, you had that opening scene that was lost and missing, and then the film turned up, and then the sound turned up from a completely different source, and they were melded together. And then, because we can now colour stuff a lot easier because it only turned up in black and white film, somebody then has to colour it. So it's actually reassembled from 3 different sources. And I love all of that. So, I think it is a perfectly worthwhile thing for Jeremy to choose. The very fact that it is missing adds to its allure and adds to its luster and adds to our interest in it, and I think is all part of that crazy mosaic that is being a Doctor Who fan. I don't know why I didn't talk about that episode. Segued onto Sidney Bromley. I'm so sorry, but he's a legend, and I can now say this is the only Doctor Who podcast with a 2-minute monologue about Sidney Bromley, prompted by Jimmy Gardner, who is cut from the same cloth. But we've got Tigana's Perd Villainy. I talked about that, didn't I? Susan and Pinchot and the dynamic. I love the dynamic. I think it's really thoughtful drama, because you put yourself in the positions of everybody and you can sort of empathise with them and almost sort of root for them. And the fact that you're rooting for different characters who have different desires makes for really interesting drama, because you can pull in 2 different directions and you can be pulled equally strongly, but those 2 things aren't compatible. And that's, I think, when life gets interesting, and why I sometimes rue these times we live in, where there are lots of absolutes in the arguments you see people having. I'm coming fresh off last night just scrolling through Twitter where people are at each other's throats about various things, and you think, and people sort of almost refuse to admit the flaws in their own argument. All of my arguments, points of view, I think, have flaws in them. Otherwise, we'd all think the same. Do you know what I mean? But it's now a sign of weakness. So you see people sort of really digging in or doing really bad false equivalents or bad faith arguments, rather than just going, yeah, I know that's a compromise to my morals, but my morals are nonetheless this because of this, that, and the other. But nobody's allowed to be wrong, I think, on Twitter. And even if you are, you can then delete it and pretend it never happened, or on forums or whatever. And I think this sort of drama shows that you can be right and wrong at the same time. You can be good and bad at the same time. And it can both be good, but both need different things. And then the audience has to decide. I don't think anyone watching this wants Marco to fail, of course, because he's nice, he's perfectly reasonable. But if his success is at the expense of the Travellers, well, it's called Doctor Who. It's our program, so Marco has to. So that's and so you have to go, well, so how are we gonna reach a compromise with this as a viewing experience? And I think that's really interesting drama. It's not blown up military bases or monsters in the shadows or all of that, but we can afford it, and we can afford it even more because we can't see it, because then we can speculate and imagine and conjure maybe more brilliance than it had in our thoughts. But a lot of people I respect really like it, and I've very much been won over by the experience of watching it, because of the the sort of elegant and empathic way that the story is told. So, not a lie to be had out of my mouth, but let's see what happens, because we've got a new arrival next week. We have a rider from Shangtu who is going to gallop through the doors of Hadoke Towers. So I better get my mop out and clean up the tea and gently place my Where's Wally mug in the sink and hope that it still holds water. But in the meantime, I hope you're having fun wherever you are and that the sun is shining on you and your loved ones. But until next time, goodbye. Thanks ever so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke, and my special guest this time around is Jeremy Bentham. I'm very grateful to him, as I am to the many patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Risto Matti Sarillo, Frank Shales, David Trainier, Stephen White, Sydney Wilson, Andrew Willis, Michael Williams, Rich Wiggins, Adam Westwood, Gary Wales, Apollo C. Vermouth, Reynard Toombs, Sabrina Tirabassi, Nick Temple, Neil Tate, Matt Sawyer, Jim Sangster, Mark Sandham, John Rivers, Dylan Rees, and Nigel Bromley together at last. Scott Pride, Kevin Parker, Jonathan Potter, Keith Pirrie, Melvin Pena, Dave Owen, Graham Knott, Matthew Newton, Nathan Moore, Stuart Mitchell, and Kevin West. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork Dylan Patterson. Would you like to be mentioned in the end credits? Then you can become a patron. It is one of the benefits, if you consider such a thing to be such a thing. The higher up the ladder you go, because there are various tiers, the more often you'd get mentioned in the credits. But that's not all you get, no sorry, Bob. You get advance releases, bonus material, your very own special podcast that nobody else gets, and a monthly Ask Me Anything, and various other things. So, and you also get the joy of knowing that you have contributed to enabling me to spend proper time doing these, hopefully to broadcast standard and to research properly the ones that require slightly more fastidious work than the off the top of my head desperation for inspiration that these ones are. But I at least to get, as I say, I edit them properly, and I've paid the guy who does the music, and I try and be professional, and most importantly, keep them ad free. I do not take a shilling from any hawker of wares, from any we send you the ingredients for the food and you cook it at home, or razors, or internet safety, whatever that they are things. They seem to be the three adverts that on everything I listen to. So no advertising either, and that's all part and parcel of the Patreon model that these go by. However, the world's going to hell in a handcart. Nobody's got any money. So I totally understand if all you can do is listen, and I'm grateful to you for that. I hope in a world where I can't give you any money either, I can at least make your day pass slightly better. If, however, you suddenly become flush, or you have a good day, or you just decide that my needs are greater than yours, whatever, you could go to kofi.com/Toby Hadoke and bung any amount of money in that pot whenever you like. There's no obligation for a monthly commitment, which is what the Patreon page is. Patreon is patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. Kofi is kofi.com/Toby Hadoke. As I say, Patreon is a monthly commitment, but that you can cancel at any time. And if you pay for a year in advance, you get 10% off your total. And the tiers start from £3 and go right up to, I think, £200. Nobody pays £200, and I wouldn't expect them to. But, you put that in there just in case. So you can do that, or you can do what costs you nothing, which is to go to iTunes or Spotify or Podbean or wherever you get your podcasts and leave these a 5-star rating and some lines of review. And tell your friends, plug them on cyberspace, say nice things any way you can that is visible, because that helps to tickle my algorithms. And when my algorithms get tickled, they smile and you can see their beam from cyberspace. So if you could do any of those things, they would be really, really helpful. But if not, mostly, thanks for listening. And, if you are feeling the pinch, we're all in this together, and we will get there, and I totally get it. You can follow me on Twitter at Toby Hadoke. These podcasts have their own stream at Hadoke Podcasts, and I also run a comedy club called Excess Malarkey. It's not called at Excess Malarkey, but that, fortunately, is its Twitter feed, so that fluff turns into a plug. At Excess Malarkey, an X, an S, and the word Malarkey, and that's a comedy club that runs every Tuesday night in Manchester and has done for 25 years. That's a career trajectory for you. I've been at the same place for 25 years. But it's a good comedy club. It's won many awards, and we get fantastic comedians and charge as little as possible for them. It runs on a non-profit making basis, actually by design rather than incompetence. And there's an online version, twitch.tv/excess monarchy, which we did during the pandemic. Because obviously we couldn't go out, and so we were unfettered by geography. So instead of getting the best acts from the United Kingdom, we got the best acts from the United Kingdom and around the world. And we put an archive of stuff up there to stand as a monument to those dark days. And they're slightly different from the live on stage shows, because of course stand-up on stage is very different to stand-up to a computer screen, and some acts experimented and some didn't. But we had all sorts: Mark Watson, James Acaster, Nish Kumar, Ed Gamble, Eddie Pepitone, Cameron Esposito, Naomi Ekperigin, Alice Fraser from Australia, Randy Feltface, all sorts of people. As I say, international rosters. And that's on twitch.tv/excess monarchy, where there are various highlights, and a monthly show that we still do a show online once a month on the first Sunday of every month at 8 p.m. GMT. And that is free at the point of contact, but we do encourage donations. But again, there is no obligation, and you can join in by typing things into your computer and all sorts. So come join us. I know most of you who listen to my Doctor Who stuff couldn't give a monkey's about the fact that I'm a comedian, but you know what? Most of the comedians that I've worked with over the past 20 years couldn't give a monkey's about Doctor Who till they get cast in Doctor Who, and then apparently it's always been their favourite thing. I can't believe I said that. But actually, I quite enjoyed so doing. And it's hidden at the end. Nobody's noticed. Shh, this is our secret. I don't know what the percentage is of people that listen right to the end, but I know some of you do. So hello, those that stick it out. Usually, probably because you're jogging and this is just marginally less painful than stopping to ferret around for your phone. Or I know a lot of people listen when they're walking their dog. I like listening to a podcast when I walk my dog. Anyway, not going to be an epic post-credits today because I can't really think of anything, and it's quite a busy week for me this week with the other work, the work that actually, keeps the wolf from the door. I can hear him baying outside. Actually, no, there are no wolves in the United Kingdom, but I can hear the foxes outside sometimes at this time of night, and I think those fellas need a safe word. I really do. Apparently they're up to sauciness, but it doesn't sound like an awful lot of fun from where I'm listening. I came face to face with one the other day, and he looked fairly chilled out, which is not the impression given by their cries at midnight. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. More Marco Polo. I think I've alluded to this, haven't I? No, I just said it. I was slightly dreading this one because definitely one of the stories I'm least familiar with. But I'm really enjoying it. I hope you are too. And I hope the sun is shining on you wherever you are. And isn't Jeremy Bentham lovely? I've been having some feedback from patrons, as I say, and Jeremy is going down very well. And I'm glad it's not just me who holds him in such affection. Until the next time, though, that's it. Go away.